Glad to have you join us again. Let's turn attention to all the conversations now. President Muhammadu Buhari this week blamed the state governors, saying their corrupt practices had endangered those whom they lead. He echoed his Minister of State for Budget and National Planning, Clement Agba, who earlier apportioned the blame on the state level. Agba claimed that the governors have abandoned the critical demography, preferring to spend state resources on the capital cities instead. He also challenged state governors on the need to address the poverty among rural dwellers to make life more meaningful for them, noting that 72% of the poorest poor people in Nigeria reside in rural communities. Well, let's get talking now. We have Nelson Ekujumi, public affairs analyst, joins us now virtually. Thank you for your time. I would like to ask you, hello, can you hear me? Hello, Mr. Ekujumi.
I can hear you. Good morning. Good morning to our viewers.
Yeah, good morning. So what do you make of the government's position as regarding the rising poverty? Blaming it on state governors? Talk to us. Does that make sense?
Come again. I can't hear you.
Now, I was asking you what you think about the federal government's position as regards the rising poverty across the country. Blaming it on state governors, does that make sense?
Well, thank you very much. I don't think it is appropriate for the federal government to want to hold the state governments responsible for the rising poverty. In as much as we want to agree with the statistics from the MPI, index, that there are more of poor people in the rural areas than the urban centers. But you want to ask, these are areas within the delineation of the responsibilities of states and local governments. And if the federal government has identified this as a problem, it behoves on the federal government to do the needful, maybe through an executive bill, because the cause of rising poverty, I think it's a joint responsibility of the three tiers of government: the federal government, the state government, and the local government. So I don't think it is enough for the federal government to want to hold the state governments alone responsible. You want to ask, what about the local government? You want to ask, what role has the federal government, done to engender, ameliorating the high rate of poverty? So I don't think it is appropriate to lay the blame squarely at the doorsteps of the state governments.
Mm. Well, it would seem that much of the, let's say, poor infrastructure witnessed in the rural areas, it seems that has been, put on the table of the state governors, especially when you look at the fact that the local governments do not have autonomy to request for funds on their own, except until recently when the local governments were granted autonomy. So don't you think that is justified? Well, I guess we have an issue of connection, internet messing up the conversation today. But let's see how we can get past this now. Nelson Ekujumi was trying to talk to us why the president will have to blame the state governors. Until recently, when the local government, was given the autonomy, to spend their money, perhaps budget, and maybe be on their own now in terms of financials. But talk to us now about 133 million, because the statistics are there. Recently, the National Bureau of Statistics revealed that about 63% persons living in Nigeria, that's about 133 million people, are multi-dimensionally poor. Well, talk to us. If you say, it doesn't make sense for the governor or the government or the federal government to blame the state governor.
But this people reside
locally.
The blame on the state governments has been responsible. Like I said earlier on, I don't want to hold the states alone, responsible for the high rate of poverty. I also want to believe that the federal government should take part of the blame. But that notwithstanding, it is a known fact that no part of the country, no land in Nigeria is owned by the federal government in any of the 36 states. And if you look at what we were taught when we were in secondary school, in the days of, in the not too far days back, we're told that the government should do everything to mitigate the rural-urban drift. But unfortunately, even in 2022, we still find situations whereby people are migrating heavily to the urban centers as though the grass is growing only at the urban centers. Meanwhile, there's no grass in the urban centers. The grass rather should be growing in the rural areas. So you want to ask, in what ways have the state governments engendered development, infrastructural, projects in the rural areas of the local governments, as well as in what way have they allowed the local governments to function as enshrined in the Constitution? As we speak, a lot of the problems bedeviling our country today is as a result of the muzzling of the local governments by the state governments, and that is why today we have high rate of poverty in the rural areas than in the urban centers. You have.
I was going to ask you, constitutionally, whose role is it at the state level? If you talk about infrastructure, if you talk about development, even the state governors are also guilty about this. So at the state level, how would you assess the performance of the state government across the country when it comes to impacting on the residents or the people living in this state?
Well, the scorecard from the data released by the NBS, it's there for us all to see. We don't need to, beat about the bush any longer. The truth of the matter is that the local government administration in almost all the states is no longer functioning. And that is why you have maladministration, even in the local government, such that people in the local governments cannot hold the government council administrations, accountable. Local governments in the country today depend on handouts from. Okay,
let's try to wrap it up now, Mr. Akunjumi. Can you hear me? If you can hear me, I want us to wrap it up here because of our time. Talk to us what.
To infrastructure and human capital development in the state government, and I want to hold the state houses of assemblies responsible for this. Okay. They have not been up and doing with regards to their oversight functions. In the states, you have legislatures from various local governments, and you expect them to aggregate the demands of their locality at the states houses of assembly. But what we have is like they are all having a party at the states houses of assembly rather than tending to the demands and the wishes of the people.
I think we'll have to leave it there because of our time. We'll probably bring you up again to talk about this. Thank you so much, Nelson Ekujimi, Public Affairs Analyst, for talking to us on Business Breakfast.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah. So we'll take a break now, and when we return, of course, we turn our attention to global oil market and look at how Brent is doing. Brent crude futures were up 20 cents to about 0.23% at $87 in early trade. We'll be back in a moment. Please stay with us.